Pros, save more on the materials you need to get the job done inside and out at Lowe's. Right now, get 10% off in-stock Trex Naturals decking, now available in more styles. Plus, get 15% off select custom entry, interior, and storm doors. Then, we'll deliver it all straight to your job site to help keep your jobs moving. Get the brands pros trust, priced right, and ready when you need them. Our best lineup is here at Lowe's. Valid through 5/27. While supplies last. Selection varies by location.
This is episode 423 of That Shakespeare Life.
Hi, I'm Rob Landers, historical ecologist at Nijmegen University, the Netherlands. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
In Shakespeare's plays, he uses the word gauntlet a total of 6 times. In one instance, the stage directions declare that a character throws down his gauntlet. In Hamlet, stage directions again refer to a gauntlet by saying that attendants bring, quote, foils and gauntlets into the scene of Act 5. But do you know what should be seen on stage in these moments? What object is that character throwing around? And what are the attendants carrying when they bring it into the scene? Gauntlet sounds like a military exercise or maybe a very difficult journey through several tough obstacles. And there's a variation of this word, which means exactly that. But that kind of gauntlet is for another episode. Today, we're looking at the kind of gauntlet that was actually an article of clothing, a glove to be precise. A highly decorated, ornate glove that came all the way up the wrist of the wearer and was designed to protect the hand against wounds. To find out more about what these gloves were made from, who it was that would have made them, and exactly what a character would be doing when they threw one down on the ground in Shakespeare's Henry VI. Today, we're talking with Hannah Marples to explore all of this history. Hannah is a clothing historian and author of the book Experimental Archeology, Testing the Wearability of a Pair of Gloves Worn by Henry Cary in the Painting by Marcus Gheeraerts the Younger, 1603. It's a meaty title, but it includes an entire chapter on gloves just like this one, the Gauntlet glove. And Hannah joins us today to help us explore the history of this article of clothing and how they connect with Shakespeare and his plays. Hannah Marples is a historic costume maker, embroiderer, and gallery coordinator based in Nottinghamshire in the UK. She makes historically accurate costumes for film, TV, museums, galleries, and reenactors with clients including the BBC, historic royal palaces, and Leeds Royal Armouries. Hannah has also digitized historic costuming patterns for publications like The Typical Tudor and The King's Servants by Jane Malcolm Davies and Nina Mikhaila. She is currently studying an MA by research at the University of Huddersfield with a focus on embroidered gauntlet gloves dating from 1600 to 1630. We're delighted to have her here today and hear what she has to say about gauntlet gloves. Hello, Hannah. Welcome to That Shakespeare Life.
Hi there.
In your research, you examined surviving embroidered gauntlet gloves from both the Elizabethan and the Jacobean periods. To start us off, what exactly distinguishes a gauntlet glove from other types of gloves that would have been worn in Shakespeare's lifetime?
So a gauntlet glove was popular from 1600 to 1630, and it is mainly characterized by having a hand section, wrist seam, and then a heavily embroidered silk gauntlet section, which may be considered as a cuff in modern day literature and writings, but it was very much described as a gauntlet during that era. Often the hand section was made of leather, but sometimes there were velvet mittens that slightly cross over into this category of garment as well. But yeah, they were very popular for about 30 years of the first 17th century.
Many of the examples of gauntlet gloves are, as you mentioned, this richly decorated with silk embroidery. I saw metallic threads and even spangles. Who was actually wearing gloves that were this elaborate in Shakespeare's lifetime? And what did they signal about the wearer's wealth or social status?
So we could see embroidered gloves begin really in paintings of Henry VIII. The cuff section is usually much shorter, only about an inch or two wide, whereas once we reach the end of the Elizabethan period, the gauntlet reaches about 4 or 5 inches in depth, and it is so heavily decorated, sometimes the silk becomes stiff. It was popular for the elites, of course, and the courtiers to wear this style because of the cost of the embroidery, the metallic threads, the spangles, and of course to have the embroidery done from the workshops as well. They were often given as gifts between lovers. However, as women and children learned needlework, the heavily embroidered gloves were then being worn by more classes, slightly more amateur versions, but still heavily embroidered. And often foreign visitors would document how these elaborate gloves were being worn by all classes, and it made it very difficult for them to tell who was worshipful, gentlemanly, or just a plain citizen. James I obviously also relaxed some of the sumptuary laws to do with embroidery, which meant people had more freedom with this style of embroidery and metallic threads. And with the gauntlets being quite a small section compared to a heavily embroidered jacket, for example, it made it a more accessible piece of clothing which could be highly decorated.
The embroidery on these gloves often includes flowers, animals, and scrolling botanical patterns. They're quite beautiful. What kinds of symbolic or fashionable meanings might these motifs have carried for people living in the late 16th or 17th century? What was most popular to have embroidered on your gauntlet glove?
So pansies were by far the most popular embroidered motif in my research. So I've got a database of around 80 extant gloves and gauntlets and glove fragments from this period, and the majority of them have pansies or heartsease embroidered on them. It was apparently one of Queen Elizabeth's favourite motifs, along with the Tudor rose. And then later on, we have the thistle with James I. Because of the dissolution of the monasteries after Henry VIII, religious iconography was prohibited, so the trends became more floral embroidery, but people wanted to still reflect the natural world. So this is why the flowers rose in popularity. And they may have started as quite symbolic. However, this became diluted as time went on, like with most trends. And J.L. Neverson actually wrote in his article in English Domestic Embroidery Patterns of 16th and 17th centuries, published in 1939, suggested that the embroideress actually used emblems because she liked them rather than because they actually symbolized anything.
Or because it's what she was good at making, I would think. That would play a huge role. I can draw this flower, but not that one. So we're going to do this.
Absolutely. Embroidery is very much like handwriting. It's very personal. And if you get good at one thing, you're going to do that one thing over and over.
A very limited experience with embroidery, but I can totally back that up. I think there is one flower shape I can make. And so I'm just envisioning that embroiderers of this period would have been the same way.
For sure.
There's two references in Shakespeare's plays to throwing down a gauntlet. One is in Henry IV, Part 3, and there's even another in King Lear. But I wonder if it was a real historical act to throw your decorative glove onto the floor as a signal that you want to fight the other person.
I have read that was the case occasionally. However, I highly doubt that it was these heavily embroidered gauntlet gloves that were being thrown onto the floor. If they were symbols of love, devotion, and gifts between loved ones, they were highly cherished and very expensive. At one point, they were almost acting like currency. So I imagine it was probably the more plainer leather, everyday wearing gloves that people would throw on the floor.
We're not going to be throwing around this, your China vase of level of gloves. So yes, well, that makes sense. Your work highlights the extraordinary craftsmanship behind these objects, and I wonder what kinds of specialists were involved in making a luxury gauntlet glove. Would it have required multiple artisans? Like, would you have had a glover, an embroiderer, and then also metal thread workers? Or would it have been, one shop that accomplished this?
So this is quite difficult to distinguish. There's not that I've found anyway in the archives that there is one person in particular involved. It seems to be that the glovers were mass producing these leather hand sectional gloves because they all have very similar measurements across the board. I've viewed about 40 gloves in total from this era, and all of them have a 4-inch wrist seam, and the finger lengths are all around 3.25 to 3.5 inches long. So it wasn't like they were making them bespoke for certain people as commissions. So I imagine the glovers were churning out all these leather sections, these hand sections, and then the embroiderers were adding these very elaborate, heavily decorated gauntlet sections, especially because the gauntlets are very simply constructed. They only have maybe one seam to do and the lining to insert as well. So I imagine that the embroiderers could have just quickly thrown that together after potentially purchasing all these hand sections of gloves. The leather hand sections, I imagine, were probably much cheaper than the embroidery. So the embroidery to be shipped from one place to another would have been quite risky, whereas I think the embroiderers would have had complete control over the selling or purchasing of these highly decorated final version of glove, especially because some of the plain gloves that I've viewed also have the exact same measurements. So I think it was more of a, let's improve these gloves, let's embellish them, let's have fun with these gloves and see what we can do. Let's see which embroidery patterns we can throw onto them, and let's see who buys them.
It was the Tudor version of bedazzling. Only children from the 80s will get that reference.
And of course, some gloves were actually purchased from perfumers as well. So they would have scents inserted into the fingers. So they were designed to be carried rather than worn. Just a very
just purely potpourri. To show off. Yes,
absolutely.
As you're listening to the show today, you can see examples of the kind of gauntlet gloves we're discussing from Shakespeare's lifetime, as well as submit some questions directly to Hannah yourself, all inside That Shakespeare Society. Access all the extras while you listen by clicking That Shakespeare Society at our episode page. That's CassidyCash.com/episode 423. Again, that's CassidyCash.com/EP423. Click on That Shakespeare Society to access in-depth research and visual content about today's show. And now let's dive into the history. I want to make a distinction for us here as we're exploring these. Are you suggesting that there were gauntlet gloves that were plain and then there were gauntlet gloves that were highly decorated, but they would both be known as gauntlet gloves because of the wrist section that's sticking out down past where your arm meets your hand? Is that correct?
Yeah, so
okay.
Some of the plainer ones, some were every inch was embroidered. There wasn't a single piece of fabric that you could see. You know, if there was a gap, there was a spangle on it. So it was completely bedazzled, whereas the more amateur versions perhaps had a few flowers just embroidered here and there. Still quite heavily embroidered, but without the metallic lace, without so many spangles. You know, it seems to be more of a hobby for those kind of plainer gloves. And then the absolute plain leather gloves were more the everyday kind without the gauntlet section. So they would have just been gloves.
Of course, here at That Shakespeare Life, our favorite glover has to be John Shakespeare, William Shakespeare's father, who was a glover by trade in Stratford-upon-Avon. Based on what we know about the glove trade in the late 16th century, Hannah, would a provincial glover like John Shakespeare have produced these decorative gauntlet gloves like the ones you've studied, or were those most likely being done only in London by a different class of glover?
I imagine the more elite workshops and perfumers as well. So it seems that they had more of a collection that they were selling. Some of the embroideries and things seem to be categorized and in themes. It's almost like the embroidery being the handwriting, these highly decorated gloves, you could sort of tell that the same person has made a collection. It might not be the exact same embroidery motifs or colours, but it's the same techniques. It's the same sort of embroidery handwriting, if you want. You can just group them together. They look very similar, even though they're all unique completely. So I imagine it was sort of the more elite London workshops, the elite embroiderers. You know, people wanted these highly decorated gauntlets to match their outfits. Richard Sackville, he in his accounts, he would label his accounts per outfit rather than per item. You know, many people group their outfit accounts via doublets or jerkins or breeches or gloves in total, but he categorized his outfits via outfit. You know, this is my outfit of embroidered moons, suns, and stars, and here are my gloves to match. You know, he completely characterized his outfits in his accounts. So, you know, to have an entire outfit embroidered with the same motifs, the same techniques, would have needed the most elite workshops and the most elite embroiderers there was, really. Complete show of wealth.
That's quite extensive to walk around in that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Now, you referred to earlier that some gauntlet gloves were perfumed and strictly to be observed. They weren't actually something that people would wear. So now I'm wondering about the social rules in Shakespeare's lifetime. When was it appropriate to actually wear these gloves? And when was it expected that you would remove them? If you're not taking them off to challenge someone to a duel, were there particular situations, like if you were greeting someone of a higher rank, entering a home, or even, I guess, you've referenced that sometimes they would be given as a gift, but were there specific situations where a gauntlet glove would be called for?
Absolutely. So when people were visiting court, they wanted to wear their best dress. They wanted to impress. And when these gloves became popular in the very early 17th century, towards the end of the Elizabethan era, Queen Elizabeth would remove her gloves in a very performative way when she would want people to kiss her hands when greeting her and show off her jewels and things. But there's a lot of references for Queen Elizabeth wanting to show off her extremely long fingers and slender hands. And so when people then wore these gloves to court, this is why there was sort of a standardization of measurements of the fingers, because people wanted to emulate long, slender hands and fingers like the Queen. So it was almost a showing off of, look how long my fingers are, whether the glove fitted or not. You know, if you were carrying these gloves, it still emulated that you had very long, slender hands and fingers.
I was trying to make a modern analog, and the only thing I can think of is how we do contouring in makeup today to make, you know, our noses look thinner, and we'll put stuff on either side to make them look longer. It's just delightful to me to know that over 400 years ago, people were still adding clothing and decorative items to change their physical appearance to be trendy, as that is essentially what that was. It was trendy to have long, slender fingers under Elizabeth I. So.
Absolutely. And very interestingly, if the gloves did fit, you were very lucky, because they were very long and thin gloves to start with. But sometimes if you wanted your jewels, your rings to be on show, they would stamp a hole in the leather finger of the glove so that your jewels could peep through the glove without you having to actually take it off. Because these gloves were skin tight, you needed a very warm hand to stretch the leather over it and for the leather to become more pliable over your hand. So it would have been quite difficult to keep taking this glove on and off, but you wanted to show off your rings at the same time. So sometimes it wasn't viable to wear your rings over the top of the fingers of your glove, but sometimes you could then just punch a hole in the finger of your glove to reveal the rings on your hand. It was amazing.
It was a lot of work to look fancy in the Elizabethan period.
Absolutely.
From your work into this topic, if we're new to the whole idea of gauntlet gloves and how they were worn and appreciated in Shakespeare's lifetime, where should we begin if we want to learn more?
Oh, for sure. The book called Gloves by Valerie Cumming. That is so important in my research. She categorizes the difference between all of these gloves, the plain leather, everyday gloves without the gauntlets, the gauntlet gloves, and she talks about the glove trades and the impact on social context. I owe a lot to that book actually about, it was a great starting point for my research. So by far, I highly recommend that one. Of course, the Royal School of Needlework, Stitch Bank. As a maker, I continuously reference that website to double check my techniques, to double check the namings of my techniques, to make sure I'm doing it right. Their tutorials are amazing, so easy to follow. Whether you're a visual learner or a wordy learner, they explain it all in both ways.
We will place links to all of these resources, as well as links to Hannah's wonderful website, where you can follow her numerous projects into historical costuming, which is a fascinating place as well. I loved looking around at what she has going on there. So stay tuned for the URL for where to find all of these excellent resources. Hannah, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible, so your choice would be in addition to those.
Well, I had a long time thinking about this actually, and I was going to go really academic and, Shakespearean, and then I couldn't help but think the the exhibition catalogue for David Bowie is inside, because the catalogue of pictures of David Bowie just bring me so much joy. I think I would need that if I was on a desert island. I think I would just need a bit of David Bowie in my life.
Well, it's important to know what brings you joy in this world, and I think taking it with you to your deserted island is perfect. That's fantastic. Well, what's next for you? What do you work on now that you're excited about?
Oh, so I finished my master's degree on the 14th of April, so that's very exciting. It's been 2 years in the making. Thank you. I'm quite nervous for it ending because it's been my life for the past 2 years. So now I'm like, oh my gosh, what's next? So yeah, continuing glove research, continuing making gloves, hopefully doing more talks and writing about more gloves as I find them, viewing more gloves, just anything to do with early 17th century gloves.
That's fantastic. It is so much fun to talk with somebody that's this thrilled about what they get to research, and we're very excited for you finishing your master's degree. We hope that goes very well, and we'll look forward to all the wonderful glove history coming from Hannah Marples moving forward. Thank you so much for being here this week and taking us through the history of the Gauntlet glove and helping us understand what that is and what we should expect to see when we see it on stage for Shakespeare's plays. It's been fun talking with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
All of the resources we've talked about in the show notes today, including more information on our guest and related podcast episodes with Jane Malcolm Davies and Nina Mikhaila, who have worked with Hannah Marples on the Typical Tudor and other historic costuming projects, are all linked and listed for you right now on our episode page for today at CassidyCash.com/episode 423. That's CassidyCash.com/EP423. And don't forget, while you're there, if you'd like to see insider extras and more research behind the idea of gauntlet gloves and how they were used in Shakespeare's lifetime, be sure to join us inside That Shakespeare Society, where there's even more history. That Shakespeare Life is researched and produced by me, Cassidy Cash. Our audio engineer is Gary Mayholm. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.